Good evening. I'm Teresa Skubik, and this is Forum Daily for Tuesday, February 11th. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau is pledging Canada will have a firm and clear response should the Trump administration go through with its threatened tariffs. In Paris today at a global summit on AI, Mr. Trudeau said that his government will work to convince the White House that steel and aluminum tariffs would hurt both countries.
Tariffs on Canadian steel and aluminum would be entirely unjustified. We are the U.S.'s closest ally. Our economies are integrated. Canadian steel and aluminum is used in a number of key American industries, whether it's defense, shipbuilding, manufacturing, energy, automotive. Together we make North America more competitive. We will be working with the American administration over the coming weeks to highlight the negative impacts on Americans and Canadians of these unacceptable tariffs. But we'll also be working with our international partners and friends. And if it comes to that, our response, of course, will be firm and clear. We will stand up for Canadian workers. We will stand up for Canadian industries. And more Canadians will stand up for each other. This is a moment of pride. This is a moment of pulling together. This is a moment for Canada to be solid.
A senior government official says that Mr. Trudeau has spoken with U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance about the impact of the steel tariffs in Ohio, which Mr. Vance represented in the U.S. Senate. U.S. President Donald Trump followed through on a weekend promise Monday, slapping 25% tariffs on aluminum and steel imports to the U.S., including products of Canada.
This order would reimpose that 25% ad valorem tariff rate on imports of steel, and it's presented for your signature now.
Okay. Do you understand what that means? It's a big deal. It's a big deal. This is the beginning of making America rich again.
As expected, Canadian politicians and business groups didn't react well to the news, with many condemning them. Industry Minister François-Philippe Champagne called the tariffs illegal and unjustifiable, while Liberal leadership candidate Chrystia Freeland released a video on social media with a direct threat to the president.
I have a message today for President Trump. If you force our hand, we will inflict the biggest trade blow that the United States has ever endured.
Toronto Regional Board of Trade President and CEO Giles Gerson is calling for immediate government action to shore up the economy and protect Canada's economic sovereignty. And federal NDP leader Jagmeet Singh says Canada cannot let the U.S. tariff threats go unanswered.
We got to punch back with retaliatory tariffs. That's step one. We also have to put in place supports for the workers impacted. Now for steel and aluminum, but in general, we can't just wait till the last minute and scramble. We know that the auto sector is also worried about impacts on workers. Our first priority is to stop these tariffs, but then alongside that, we're going to make sure we don't let workers bear the brunt of it, so workers get supported. And I've been speaking to a lot of Canadians about how they feel about what Donald Trump's doing. Of course, there's worry, but now Canadians are pissed off. They feel insulted. We were good neighbors. We worked together to build a good economy, and Donald Trump has insulted us. People feel offended at this idea of the 51st state. So Canadians on their own are already taking action. They're saying, we're going to buy Canadian, we're going to boycott American. And I want to acknowledge all the Canadians making that decision. Thank you for doing that. It's the right thing to do. We want to make it easier for Canadians to make that choice. So if you're making a big purchase, like buying a car, probably one of the biggest purchases in your life, we want to support Canadians who want to buy Canadian by bringing back the rebate on electric vehicles. So our move now is we want to put 100% tariff on Tesla cars. You pick a fight with Canada, we're going to fight back. We're going to make sure Donald Trump and Elon Musk feel it. So that's our vision. We want to be able to support Canadians to buy Canadian, and we're going to fight back at those that are taking shots at our country.
He's calling for Ottawa to respond with dollar-for-dollar retaliatory tariffs and changes to procurement, so Canada buys Canadian-made steel and aluminum from Canadian manufacturing. But the chaos of the Trump presidency so far isn't limited to Canada. Mr. Trump said that Palestinians in Gaza would not have a right to return under his plans for U.S. ownership of the territory. Mr. Trump was asked by Fox News if Palestinians would have a right to return to the territory, to which Mr. Trump responded, no, they wouldn't.
We'll build beautiful communities for the 1.9 million people. We'll build beautiful communities, safe communities. Could be 5, 6, could be 2, but we'll build safe communities a little bit away from where they are, where all of this danger is. In the meantime, I would own this. Think of it as a real estate development for the future. It would be a beautiful piece of land.
Would the Palestinians
no
have the
big
right
money
to return?
spent. No, they wouldn't, because they're going to have much better housing, much better. In other words, I'm talking about building a permanent place for them. Because if they have to return now, it'll be years before you could ever. It's not habitable. It will be years before it could happen. I'm talking about starting to build, and I think I could make a deal with Jordan. I think I could make a deal with Egypt. You know, we give them billions and billions of dollars a year.
Mr. Trump recently pitched his idea for the U.S. to take control of Gaza and turn it into the Riviera of the Middle East. And last night in the Oval Office, Donald Trump spoke again about the conditions of the hostages just released, and he gave Hamas an ultimatum to release all of the hostages.
Well, I would say this, and I'm going to let that be because that's Israel's decision. But as far as I'm concerned, if all of the hostages aren't returned by Saturday at 12 o'clock, I think it's an appropriate time. I would say cancel it and all bets are off and let hell break out. I'd say they ought to be returned by 12 o'clock on Saturday, and if they're not returned, all of them, not in drips and drabs, not 2 and 1 and 3 and 4 and 2. Saturday at 12 o'clock, and after that, I would say all hell is going to break out.
And when asked to clarify on that comment, the president appeared to double down on that threat.
When you say all hell is going to break loose, are you speaking about retaliation from
You'll
Israel?
find out, and they'll find out too. Hamas will find out what I mean.
Mr. President,
They're going to find out what I mean. These are sick people, and they'll find out what I mean Saturday at 12 o'clock.
But no involvement.
However, brushed off U.S. President Donald Trump's threat that all hell will break out if the militant group doesn't release the remaining hostages held in Gaza by Saturday. A Hamas spokesperson said today that the dozens of hostages would only be returned if all parties remained committed to the ceasefire deal. Hamas has threatened to delay the next release of 3 Israeli hostages due Saturday, accusing Israel of violating the ceasefire agreement. Benjamin Netanyahu is now threatening to withdraw from the ceasefire and resume fighting in Gaza if Hamas does not free hostages on Saturday. Liberal leadership candidate Frank Bayless says that Canada needs to retake its position as leaders of human rights in the world.
Canada has always been known as a country that steps up in time of crisis to help our fellow world citizens. And we've done this time and again. We did this in Syria when we saw the horrible images coming out of Aleppo, the destruction, the human sufferance. Canada stepped up, and we brought in 40,000 refugees. We had an impact. The second time we saw this in the Ukraine. Again, horrible images of destruction, human suffering. And again, Canada stood up. This time, we brought in close to 300,000 refugees. Regrettably, when we saw it the third time, when we saw it happening in Gaza, the same types of horrible images, destruction, human suffering, this time Canada did nothing. We failed in our role. And this is a double standard, and it's a form of discrimination that we have done against the Palestinian people.
At a news conference in Ottawa on Monday, Mr. Bayless announced a new proposal regarding the country's role in the Gaza Strip, which includes formally recognizing the nation of Palestine.
We're going to invest in helping the Palestinian people rebuild their society. We're going to help them rebuild their hospitals. We're going to help them rebuild their schools. We're going to help them rebuild their homes. And in doing so, they will rebuild their civil society. This is the first steps towards peace. We are going to see the Palestinian people. We're going to acknowledge that they are a people. We're going to acknowledge that there is a nation. And we are going to formally recognize their nation, the state of Palestine. And we're going to address this double standard where Canada has always said for decades we believe in a two-state solution, and yet we've only ever recognized one of the two states. This is again a double standard, and it's a double standard based in discrimination. So with that, I am absolutely convinced that the best way forward for peace in the Middle East, for peace between Israelis and Palestinians, is that they stand on equal footing, both recognized, both honored, and both seen as human beings.
All right, stay tuned. Up next, we'll be speaking to Sam Cooper from the Bureau on the issue of fentanyl crossing into the U.S. from Canada. After that, Vice President J.D. Vance attends a Paris summit on artificial intelligence. These stories and more right after the break. The issue of drugs, specifically fentanyl, crossing from Canada into the United States has been front and center in the looming trade war with the Trump administration. And one of the proposed solutions to the problem is a fentanyl czar, which was first proposed by Alberta Premier Danielle Smith on January 29th.
In just the next couple of days, to have the best chance to avoid tariffs is to show clear and unequivocal action to secure the border. This should start with the appointment of a Canadian border czar to work with the new American border czar to jointly crack down hard on fentanyl and illegal migrants. Is this likely to end the threat of tariffs entirely? I don't think so. I think there'll be other things that we will need to work on, and we will do so. But I am convinced, after speaking with dozens of elected U.S. representatives, administration officials, and the president himself, that this is the most important first step.
And after it was announced that Ottawa would in fact appoint a fentanyl czar, Ontario Premier Doug Ford said last week that Canada needs to stop dilly-dallying and name one.
My question again to Prime Minister Trudeau, where is the fentanyl czar? It's been now 5 days, I believe, and time is running out. We can't be waiting till the last minute. Please appoint a fentanyl czar. Start showing the Americans what we are doing. Show the Trump administration that we have helicopters and fixed wing aircraft and boots on the ground and boats in the water and ATVs up and down. That's what Ontario is doing. But we need to see action from the federal government.
Mr. Ford suggested that retired General Rick Hillier could do the job, calling him a patriot, while reporting from the Globe and Mail has suggested that it could be retired General Wayne Eyre.
We at the Globe are reporting, and this is through my colleagues in the Ottawa Bureau, we're reporting a few different names. At this point, we're hearing about retired General Wayne Eyre, the former chief of the defense staff, as a potential choice. But we are also reporting that no decisions have been made. At this point, that's likely because, again, there are no real sort of good ways to go about this, right? At this point, I think a lot of people, there's going to be, whoever this person is hired for this, they're going to have to, really be the person that we convince Mr. Trump is the right person for this. And that's a lot, it's convincing an entire, White House administration that's hell-bent on imposing tariffs if we don't convince them. And they could go in every different way, as we've seen over the course of the last few days. So it's a lot of responsibility on this one person.
And while there appears to be an agreement that something needs to be done to tackle the problem of fentanyl, there is a growing debate on the size and scope of the problem. We're going to bring in Sam Cooper from the Bureau for more on the problem. Sam, thanks for joining us today.
Glad to be here.
Now, we know that Ottawa has highlighted at several points that fentanyl is a problem, but that the amount of fentanyl flowing into the U.S. from Canada is minuscule in comparison to the U.S. border with Mexico. What do you make of that claim?
I think it's a claim that focuses on a not very important data point. Look, the facts are in Canadian criminal intelligence reports that Canada has become a fentanyl export nation. That means that fentanyl precursors are coming into especially British Columbia, and data shows they're flowing out around the world. So to focus on 40 kilograms at the northern border with the United States, I think is misdirection. I'll give you a few more data points. I have reported in my book, Willful Blindness, that a business person connected to the highest levels of Asian organized crime that were found to be laundering billions of dollars through British Columbia casinos. This man was caught by the RCMP with 85 tons of precursors for meth, amphetamine, and fentanyl. If those were pressed up into pills, that's enough to kill a lot of people. Another data point, over 1,000 kilograms of fentanyl precursors were caught by the CBSA in Vancouver's port in 2022. Again, that's an industrial scale load. Another figure here, as we know, RCMP, and I know, based on a DEA investigation, caught a so-called super lab in northern British Columbia. The RCMP at a press conference said that they knew 95 million pills was the capacity there, and they confirmed a large load was going out to an unidentified country. All of these facts show that I believe the American government is right. Canada has become a major vulnerability in global fentanyl trafficking. And it's not just the United States that is suffering the impacts of that. It's Australia, Japan, and other allies.
Now, you've mentioned that the figures quoted by Ottawa are just the seizures, but how exactly are we screening for fentanyl at our borders and at our ports?
It's confirmed in the Vancouver port, which is subject of essentially the justification or warning from the Trump administration, that officials locally in Vancouver say that only 0.5 of 1% of the containers coming into the Delta port in Vancouver, that's one of the 4 largest ports in North America, a minuscule amount of containers are actually searched. And so my reporting, talking to people that can talk off the record, say the Delta police chief and mayor are exactly right. The organized crime is having a field day, essentially an open window into Canada's western province. And as my own exclusive reporting has shown, especially Asian organized crime at the highest levels has infiltrated Vancouver's port in the same way that they are infiltrating the west coast of Mexico and ports in Panama. And the common thread there is British Columbia, just like Panama and Mexico, is seen rightly by the US government and the US military as a major vulnerable point in fentanyl importation and exportation.
Now, I want to piggyback a little bit off of what you said about the fact that Canada does have a problem. So I'm curious, why would Canada or Ottawa wait until Donald Trump decided to threaten tariffs to actually decide to do something about what's happening at the border, what's happening at our ports?
That's a great question. That's the question that may determine Canada's sovereignty, I'm very sorry to say. Look, my book, Willful Blindness, and my reporting at the Bureau indicates that Canada's government, for a long time, but most especially the current federal government, has discounted cracking down on foreign interference. And my reporting indicates foreign interference from nations including China and Iran is directly connected to the leveraging of organized crime. And so if you're not cracking down on organized crime, and Canada has notoriously weak laws around the lack of ability to prosecute money laundering and transnational organized crime, that's going to create a vulnerability that will be of interest not only to Washington, but to Canberra, London, even in New Zealand, France, Europe. Other nations are worried about our lack of capacity.
Now, there have been some pretty high-profile busts in Alberta and BC, but who exactly is funding and profiting off of these operations?
I can say with confidence that although the RCMP haven't come out clearly and said it, the British Columbia Super Lab, again in Falkland, BC, a small mountainous town with perhaps only 1 or 2 local police officers, this is said to be the largest known lab in the world. And my sources indicate that Chinese organized crime at the highest levels and Mexican cartels would be directly involved in the running of that lab on Canadian soil. In other words, the most powerful, brutal, and profitable international organized crime with direct connections of corruption to their home states are using British Columbia. And again, this is what the concern is of the federal government in the United States. And I'll add that my sources in the US and Canada do indicate that Iranian state-sponsored crime at a high level would also be involved in these labs in Western Canada. Finally, it's known by Canada's government and the United States government that the highest level of Asian triads are using Western Canada for lab production. And not only that, they're using Toronto and Vancouver for money laundering at scale that facilitates this whole operation.
I want to go back and talk about the fentanyl czar position that Canada is looking to fill. Now, a few names have been thrown around for who they think the best fit could be, even though no one has yet been appointed to this position. But I'm curious, is this Canada just putting a Band-Aid on a bullet hole, or do you think that there will be some benefit for having this new position?
I do think there's a strong benefit for having that position. The US government is not stupid. They know the people that would be credible. I believe we even heard Premier Smith say it needs to be a credible nominee. And what the czar would do would be to bring together American law enforcement and Canadian law enforcement. Remember, a co-country strike force against organized crime is another part of the deal that is supposed to happen to avert these tariffs. And so the czar, a credible czar, whether a former general, whether I've pointed to a mayor in British Columbia, which the American government has already reached out to in a trilateral meeting between mayors in Mexico, United States, and Canada. That's Mayor Brad West. There are also high-level former RCMP officers that could fulfill that role. So my message here is if the Canadian government is dilly-dallying with this role, they're welcoming the tariffs to hit us.
Well, Sam, thank you so much for the time today. I appreciate it.
My pleasure.
All right, stay with us. Coming up after the break, we'll have more of today's top national and international headlines. A U.S. federal judge orders the Trump administration to unfreeze $3 trillion in federal funds. Stay with us. We'll be right back. A federal judge has ordered the Trump administration to immediately unfreeze all $3 trillion U.S. in federal funds, finding it violated his temporary restraining order by keeping some of the dollars paused. The judge ruled that the broad, categorical, and sweeping fund freeze is likely unconstitutional and is irreparably harming a vast portion of this country. Andrew Donaldson from OrdinaryTimes.com has more on the funding freeze.
So what we have here really is we have a political story with a lot of theater. There's a lot of underlying policy promises, both political and policy, how the government's going to work. What we really have, though, is a live action drama about how the American government works. Now, as a constitutional federal republic, we have a separation of powers. Congress has the delineated power of a purse. They control the money through the representatives of the people in the House of Representatives and the U.S. Senate. The executive, of course, has control over the executive agencies. And the Supreme Court is supposed to oversee all this with oversight and things like that and negotiate things like disputes between the states and the federal government and states between the states. So what's really going on here is this is kind of the middle of the story with these court orders. So Donald Trump came in and started doing all these budget cuts that they wanted to do, funding cuts. And there's two kinds of spending. There's discretionary and mandatory, and they're going in, especially the Doge team under Elon Musk, who, and part of the story is most of those people weren't vetted and hired through the normal processes to get to these things. They're slashing them. So, of course, people are fighting back via court orders and lawsuits. This is nothing new. Every administration has had lawsuits. Remember, the Biden administration had lawsuits they had to contend with things like the student loan forgiveness program that they kept getting pulled back and then trying to work around things like that. Trump's a little less subtle. He's just basically plowing ahead. So watch for a lot of back and forth with this thing, but understand what's really going on here is a debate over the control of money, which is the control of power in the government. Congress is supposed to have it. Congress hasn't done a real good job of reining in the executive, and now we have an executive and President Donald Trump that is really pushing the boundaries of who gets to control this funding. So that's what you watch for in these court cases. This will go back and forth. At some point, this will probably wound up at the Supreme Court because these sorts of things tend to get fast-tracked. And that's the sort of thing you need to view these things through the lens because there's going to be dozens and dozens of these across multiple agencies, and it's going to have the same theme. Does the president have power to take away funding that Congress has allocated as part of the executive? It's a fundamental question of the American system of government, and it's going to be a really messy TV product to try to keep up with. So Vice President J.D. Vance came out and made some comments about how judges wouldn't tell a general what to do. Actually, they do. We have this thing called the Judge Advocate General Corps that does exactly that. And judges wouldn't tell attorneys what to do, which that would be news to any trial practicing attorney because J.D. Vance does have a law degree, but he didn't actually practice law. Perhaps he should have. thing to keep in mind here, too, is somebody like J.D. Vance and a lot of the people in the Trump order, J.D. Vance thinks he's going to be president in 46 and a half months. So he's perfectly fine with presidential power getting emboldened because he thinks he's going to be president himself in short order. So he may not be the most unbiased opinion on these sorts of things. But his overall point has merit. Donald Trump is going to push these boundaries to see how much power he has as the executive branch. And this is something that's been going on for multiple terms across multiple presidencies of both parties. The presidential power has gotten more and more and more, and Congress has gotten less and less of their constitutional authority. At some point, there will be pushback, legal or otherwise. But really, the legal system can only do so much because the Supreme Court's going to turn around. The theme of this Roberts Courts has been mostly Congress needs to fix this. And unless Congress asserts its authority, this is going to kind of be the round robin, round and round we're going to go, no matter who the president is, as long as they want to push their limits of power.
While attending his first foreign gathering since taking office last month, the new U.S. vice president told a Paris summit on artificial intelligence that the Trump administration will, quote, ensure that AI systems developed in America are free from ideological bias.
The Trump administration believes that AI will have countless revolutionary applications in economic innovation, job creation, national security, healthcare, free expression, and beyond. And to restrict its development now will not only unfairly benefit incumbents in the space, it would mean paralyzing one of the most promising technologies we have seen in generations. Now, with that in mind, I'd like to make 4 main points today. Number 1, this administration will ensure that American AI technology continues to be the gold standard worldwide, and we are the partner of choice for others, foreign countries, and certainly businesses as they expand their own use of AI. Number 2, we believe that excessive regulation of the AI sector could kill a transformative industry just as it's taking off, and will make every effort to encourage pro-growth AI policies. And I like to see that deregulatory flavor making its way into a lot of the conversations this conference. Number 3, we feel very strongly that AI must remain free from ideological bias, and that American AI will not be co-opted into a tool for authoritarian censorship. And finally, number 4, the Trump administration will maintain a pro-worker growth path for AI, so it can be a potent tool for job creation in the United States.
J.D. Vance also said today that the U.S. would, quote, never restrict our citizens' right to free speech. He also used his speech to world leaders, tech bosses, and researchers to push back against what he called excessive regulation of the rapidly growing AI industry. And Prime Minister Justin Trudeau says worldwide regulations are essential to make sure the benefits of artificial intelligence aren't only enjoyed by extremely wealthy people. At a global conference on AI in Paris, Mr. Trudeau insisted the quickly evolving technology needs guardrails, transparency, and accountability.
We cannot stop progress. We shouldn't want to. But we need to have guardrails, transparency, accountability. We must put AI to the service of everyone in both high and low income countries, and not just for an increasingly small group of ultra-rich oligarchs whose only concern is the value of their stock portfolios. We must put the middle class at the center of AI, and AI in service of the middle class, allowing people everywhere to work smarter, not harder, to do more with less. Businesses must grow faster along with their employees, instead of doing the same thing they do now, but with fewer employees. We must go beyond imitating what builders, creators, and artists already do so well. We need to make sure that the profits, the power, the benefits that come from this new technology are fairly shared.
And today, the Global AI Action Summit in Paris continued, with Prime Minister Justin Trudeau attending meetings. Day 2 featured heads of state and government discussing ways to approach the rapidly advancing technology. The summit is looking at questions about artificial intelligence and the public interest, the future of work, innovation and culture, public trust in AI, and global governance. Justice Minister Arif Virani says that a decade in public office has taken a toll on his family and that he won't be running in the next federal election. The Liberal MP is the latest to not seek re-election. More than a dozen Liberal cabinet ministers, including Prime Minister Justin Trudeau himself, have ruled out running in the coming federal election. The Liberal Party will choose a replacement for Mr. Trudeau in March. President Donald Trump took steps to keep a campaign promise to stop the federal government from buying plastic straws.
Next, this is an executive order relating to the use of paper straws. As you've consistently identified, nobody really likes paper straws.
Number one trending. Can you believe it? A paper straw was number one trending for 3 days or something.
The environmental impact of plastic straws versus paper straws is entirely unclear. This has cost both the government and private industry an absolute ton of money and left consumers all over the country wildly dissatisfied with their straws. So we're asking aspects of the federal government, federal departments and agencies to look at their existing procurement processes, and we're asking your Domestic Policy Council to look holistically at this issue to address it, and it really is something that affects ordinary Americans in their everyday lives.
We're going back to plastic straws. These things don't work. I've had them many times, and on occasion they break, they explode. If something's hot, they don't last very long, like a matter of minutes, sometimes a matter of seconds. It's a ridiculous situation. So we're going back to plastic straws. I think it's okay. And I don't think that plastic's going to affect a shark very much as they're munching their way through the ocean. Okay.
Thank you, sir.
Insisting paper straws don't work, Mr. Trump signed an executive order on Monday reversing a Biden administration policy phasing out federal purchases of single-use plastics, including straws, by 2035. Mr. Trump has long rallied against paper straws, including during his 2019 re-election campaign, where he sold Trump-branded reusable plastic straws. All right, coming up next, Doug Ford speaks to the press about protecting the U.S.-Canada border and also reiterates his belief that Canada and the U.S. work best when they're working together. Ontario Liberal leader Bonnie Crombie pledges to cut Ontario's unemployment rate in half. And Ontario's political party leaders pledge to help the animals at Marineland following the death of another beluga whale last week, making it the 18th to die since 2019. Don't go anywhere. Forum Daily will be right back after these messages. At a campaign stop in Oakville, Ontario Progressive Conservative leader Doug Ford spoke about progress that has been made to protect the U.S.-Canada border.
We need the federal government to pass strict and severe mandatory minimum sentences for any thug convicted of trafficking fentanyl or other dangerous drugs. The province and the federal government need to work together to get to the root cause, auditing banks, credit unions, and any financial institution that may be financing gangs or cartels. And we need the Trudeau government to get on with naming the fentanyl czar. It's been 7 days, it's been a whole week. This can't be the speed we operate at.
Mr. Ford reiterated his belief that both Canada and the United States work best when they're working together, especially when facing potential economic threats from China.
Canada and the United States are the strongest when we work together. For decades, we've been in each other's largest trading partners, creating jobs, growing businesses, and putting bigger paychecks into workers' pockets. On both sides of the border, that's what we need to make sure we stay focused on every single day. Working together, we can make Canada and the U.S. the richest, most successful, safest, most secure two countries on the planet. By building out our grid, by securing our grid, Ontario is uniquely positioned to power economic growth and fuel job creation on both sides of the border. Ontario is leading the charge. More exports, more investment, more growth. That's what we need to do as PCs. We get things done. The only way we can achieve any of this is if the U.S. and Canada work together. If we stay focused on the real threats that undermine our shared economic success, that undermine our workers.
The leaders of Ontario's main political parties are pledging to help the remaining animals at Marineland should they win the election. The Niagara Falls, Ontario tourist attraction euthanized a young beluga whale last week after a lengthy battle with numerous medical issues. It's the 18th beluga whale to die at the park since late 2019, though Marineland has long defended its treatment of animals. Provincial inspectors have visited the park over 200 times since 2020. Progressive Conservative leader Doug Ford said on Monday that the whale deaths were terrible.
It'd be great just to let them free, but what I understand, if you let them free in the ocean, they're done. They're dead. So we're going to make sure that they still take care of these whales. But now, what I'm told by the whale experts, I said, hey, let's be able to transfer them. Is that an idea? No, they won't survive. So we're going to have to make the best of it. But we'll do everything we can to support it. What can I say? It's unfortunate.
NDP leader Merritt Stiles said that many Ontarians are worried about the animals at Marineland.
Yeah, I mean, this has been going on for far too long. It's outrageous. It's an embarrassment, I think, for Ontario. And I've said before, and my colleague Wayne Gates in Niagara has spoken out about the need for the government to intervene here. I think Marineland needed to be shut down, and we need to get these mammals out of that, or at least make sure that they're treated at this point in their lives humanely. We cannot just continue to wait it out till they all die. It's really inhumane, and I think a lot of Ontarians are very concerned about it.
And Liberal leader Bonnie Crombie said that Mr. Ford's government failed the animals at the park.
Thank you. You know, this is a heartbreaking situation and one that could be resolved with better inspection and better regulation.
And this morning on the campaign trail, Bonnie Crombie made a pledge to cut Ontario's unemployment rate in half.
You are still living with your parents because you can't afford to be out of your parents' home. In fact, you're missing life's milestones. And I will say that it's totally unacceptable. Doug Ford has failed our young people. Our unemployment rate for young people is 17%, and for me, that is unacceptable. We are losing a generation of kids who are getting left behind. In fact, I also know many of you have been told if you want to be successful, you have to leave the province. For me, that's unacceptable. So today, I want to offer you something tangible. I want to restore hope and jobs, and I want to smash the unemployment rate in half. Ontario's Liberals have a plan to smash our employment rate in half. We're also going to ensure that you have a family doctor. And we're also going to promise you that you won't be saddled with student loans and student debt. This government said it couldn't get done, but we know that it can. And we're going to bring back a measure of affordability. And we're going to ensure that you have access to jobs, real jobs, well-paying jobs.
And while Bonnie Crombie made her address in Toronto, Doug Ford was in Washington, D.C., addressing the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. In his address, Premier Ford highlighted how important it is to remember everything the two countries have achieved together.
And it's so important to remember everything we've achieved together. But now, more than ever, we need to focus on the future. And we need to be clear, very clear-eyed, about the real risk we're facing right now, about the true trade war we're waging, which is, in my opinion, is totally unnecessary, which will hurt both countries dramatically, about our common economic enemy, and I'll tell you who our common economic enemy is. As the whole world is watching two closest friends about to wage an economic war against each other, the world is watching carefully. A lot of the world is saying, we're next. A lot of the world is sitting back and laughing. And I'll tell you who's sitting back and laughing is China. China's sitting back and thinking we couldn't ask for a better plan than this. Over the last few months, I've met and spoken with senators, congressmen and women, governors from every region of America and from both sides of the aisle. And I'll tell you what they say. They won't say it publicly. They say, this is the craziest thing I've ever heard. And no matter if it's Democrat or Republican, I have yet to hear one elected official down here and say, that's a great idea. Let's attack Canada economically. It's never been said. I've yet to meet one CEO, and I've talked to endless CEOs, say, let's go after Canada. Every single U.S. corporation, their headquarters, for the most part, not all, but a good chunk of them, probably 80, 85%, they're located in Toronto or Ontario somewhere. And the supply chain is so integrated.
Mr. Ford is visiting the U.S. Capitol to promote the Canada-U.S. trade relationship amid President Donald Trump's ongoing tariff threats. And according to a report from Restaurants Canada last week, the industry is facing uncertainty in 2025. Restaurants Canada said that their members are struggling with high costs, a shrinking labor pool, and now threats of tariffs from the United States. The Toronto Sun's Brian Passafoom has more on the sector.
What they're describing is almost like an endless cycle of inflationary pressure. Restaurants are having a hard time, making ends meet. Supplies, food, utilities, rent, everything goes higher, and that's coupled with inflationary pressure on the customer as well. People are, when disposable income falls, the first thing usually goes is eating out. Particularly these days, it used to be that you could, get a cheap lunch at McDonald's, but now when I take my family, it's almost $50 just to, get a meal. So, so restaurants are, they're kind of rocking a hard place situation. They're having to cut staff. They're having a hard time trying to find staff. And at the same time, people are just eating out less. So it's what that translates into is the restaurant industry in Canada is only going to see a 0.08 real growth for 2025, which is a disappointing because they're just coming off the pandemic. Pandemic was really hard on restaurants. Restaurants had to close. They had to drastically reshape their business model to just take out or dining outside and all that nonsense. But yeah, it's just kind of the last thing that the restaurant industry needs right now. They were kind of hoping the post-pandemic would be a boom for them, but with inflation and the threats of tariffs, it's pretty much it's all up in the air for restaurant owners right now. One of the big things that they said is, especially when it comes to tariffs, threats of pulling American alcohol off the shelves and American beer. Restaurants in Ontario specifically, they have to buy their liquor from the LCBO. They operate stores that people can buy in, but they're also the province is only wholesaler of alcohol. So what they want is they want the provincial government to get rid of markups. For example, if a restaurant was to buy like a bottle of Jack Daniel's compared to a customer, they've got a certain markup that they have to pay, which is a huge, it's a huge yoke around their necks. Anybody who knows anything about the restaurant business who knows that they make a lot of their money on the bar. So anything that to help. As well, they were looking at the ongoing tax holiday, which comes to an end this week. It gave a big boost, and they're hoping that restaurants are in trouble right now. They're not looking for a bailout. They're not looking for a handout. They're looking for help. They're looking for assistance, especially a lot of the small operators. They're going out of business, and they need all the help they can get.
I'm Teresa Skubic, and that'll do it for your look at national and international news for today. For more news on demand, you can always visit our website at forumdailynews.ca and make sure to follow us on social media. Good night, Canada.